Welcome back, folks. As always, I have many pages of notes. I'm actually spending way too much time preparing for these things, but I am enjoying this, and I do think it's important. You can post questions here, although it's always a little hard to read the comments in here. I went and grabbed the questions you guys had posted in the 2 live updates I gave announcing this was coming, because I was just figuring out how TikTok advertises this stuff. So I have a number of questions here. I've also talked to a number of friends of mine, Russia experts in the last day, some who are former U.S. intelligence, others who are just super duper bilingual, worked in Russia. One of them worked in Russia, back and forth, U.S.-Russia, as a lawyer. Imagine an American lawyer being so fluent in Russian, she was negotiating things in Russian, negotiating Russian, like, contracts and things. So she really knew her stuff. Got a lot of good feedback from the friends. Let's just dig right in. So I kind of like to start these things with I've got a lot of details of where we are, the good and the bad, explaining to you kind of what it all means, but also just to give you a general sense of where everything stands right now. Oops, as my phone falls over slowly. But, we're not in that different of a position than we were yesterday. A lot of news since yesterday, and we'll go over it, but we're still in this sort of interesting standoff where Ukraine has held on longer than anybody expected, right? We're day 5 of this war. Everybody sort of expected, day 2 or so, the Russians were or day 1 or 2, the Russians were going to bomb the hell out of everything. The troops would swoop in. The Ukrainians would do a horrible job. No offense, but, thinking the Ukrainian army wouldn't be any match for the great 10-foot tall Russians. And not that it would be over, but, Ukraine would be occupied within a couple days. Well, we're at day 5. The Russians don't hold any big cities. They've gotten so desperate that they're now using cluster bombs, which we'll talk about in a second, in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, which I learned to pronounce today. It is spelled Kharkiv, but it's pronounced Kharkiv, or Kharkiv, like an H at the beginning, or Greek K, which we use, and K at the end, so Kharkiv. They've been using cluster bombs, going after civilian populations. Horrific weapon, we'll talk about, going after civilians, but it's a sign of how desperate the Russians are at this point, how desperate Putin is. He thought it was going to be easier, and honestly, we thought it was going to be easier for him. Talking to my former intelligence friend, or my current friend who's former intelligence, not based on anything classified, just saying, his read of the land right now, but he said he was so shocked at how badly the Russians have been doing. He said their military is doing worse than the Iraqis did in 2003 against us, meaning the Iraqi army was horrible. They were just horribly trained, didn't know what they were doing, just rolled over, and he's getting the same impression, if not worse, from the Russians. And reason being that the Russians have top-notch equipment, best equipment in the world, but you're only as good as the training and the people using the equipment, and their troops aren't very well trained. They're conscripts, which means they're drafted, so they don't want to be there. Most have been there for less than a year. I think I read they were getting 6 weeks, 8 weeks training. We're now finding out from a number of the POW stories that these guys didn't even know they were going to Ukraine. One really sad story today, which I'll read you, of one of the Russian soldiers who was texting with his mother and died moments after texting with the mom. They've got his phone and they were reading it today at the UN. And this poor guy sounds like he didn't know what was going on. He was doing military exercises in Crimea, and all of a sudden he's in the middle of war. And he didn't know it was coming. The parents had no idea. The parents were like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean you're at war in Ukraine?" Right? I mean, the families don't know. That does not help with morale. And then you're fighting the Ukrainian army, which, as we know, morale is, they created morale, right? Anyway, let's start going through some of the topics here, though. So the latest figures from the Ukrainian government, again, take it with a grain of salt, because the Russians clearly lie about everything, but the Ukrainians, they might inflate things occasionally because that's their job. Both sides are going to inflate a little, but the Russians are really lying. But the Ukrainians say they've killed 5,300 Russian troops, 191 tanks, which would be a big deal, 60 tank refueling tanks, refueling trucks. That's a huge deal, because one of the biggest problems the Russians have been having is their logistics. One of the biggest issues, and I've talked about this in some of my other lives, but one of the biggest issues with these kind of wars that people who I learned it myself recently, but people who don't know the military, they're always thinking of the strategy. So they think, oh no, what's important is, what's the strategy? What cities are we going after? What bombs are we doing? How are we going to take the city? And they're not thinking of the logistics, which is, how do we keep our soldiers fed, watered, Weaponized, in other words, they're shooting guns. Where are they getting more bullets from? It's not like they go to the corner bullet store, right? And where are they getting gas and diesel fuel for their tanks and vehicles? My friend was telling me, for example, that a tank can go a day or two without fuel. It's been 5 days. Where's the fuel coming from? Well, guess what? You may have heard today in the news that there is this huge 3-mile-long convoy heading towards Kyiv. Not Kiev. Kyiv is the proper name for the capital of Ukraine, and it's getting closer and closer to Kyiv. Well, it's a convoy. They were just talking on CNN right now with some of the experts that a lot of these trucks of the convoy are simply, those cloth-covered, almost like with a skeleton on it, I would say, like a frame, and cloth covering the back. That's it. It's like a pickup truck with a cloth cover. Well, they're not going to be able to defend themselves. They need actual combat troops to defend themselves, but these supply logistics, these supply trucks seem to be undefended. The Russians have done a terrible job, apparently, supplying all their tanks. Because again, any of the weapons that have moved, near Kharkiv, near Kyiv, these guys, where are the troops getting water from? Where are they getting food from? Where are they getting new weapons from? So anyway, the Russians are doing a bad job, and this is why we've had a lot of reports, and there's images of this too, not just of Russian convoys of fuel, but also convoys of tanks and actual hard machinery getting blown up by the Ukrainians, and really sad pictures today. I mean, happy pictures on CNN of seeing that these convoys were destroyed, but really sad to see that some of the dead Russians were in the street. It was really awful. I mean, to see, and they intentionally didn't get close to it because it was really just horrible to see. Sorry, somebody just has to join. Sorry, nobody can join the chat right now. That threw me. I was wondering what was popping up in my face. Any case, I was saying about the resupply and everything else and how the convoys, but the other thing is some of these things are getting just driven off the road because they don't have fuel, right? I mean, I talked to you yesterday, and I'm sure some of you have now seen the video. I've got it in my TikTok, but a lot of people already have it, of a Ukrainian man who was trolling the Russian troops. The first one wasn't a tank. The first one was some other kind of armored vehicle, but he drove by and he said to them, like they were on the road, he stopped, he goes, "Hey, you break down? I can tow you back to Russia." And they all start laughing. Well, what they told him is they said, "No, we're out of fuel." But imagine they just ran out of fuel and they're dead in the water, dead on the road. Nothing they can do. So that's a huge deal. This is just not good for the Russians. It's gone this long. Now, one of the questions, and then I'll get to more of the details here. So one of the questions that folks were asking is, where does it go from here? The concern is remaining that the Russians don't have enough troops to win at this point. They have enough troops to rush in and kind of sort of occupy the capital. And when I say occupy, I mean, they move in, but to take the capital and control it, they don't have enough troops. I explained the other day that the Russians have got somewhere between 160,000 and 200,000 troops. Well, guess what? Remember I just told you about logistics and how you need all these supply trucks coming in, you need drivers, you need people in charge of distributing the water and the weapons and the food, right? And all the diesel fuel and who actually refills the tanks, and there's got to be a truck that goes around with the fuel to refill each tank, right? That's a lot of coordination. That takes a lot of manpower. Well, guess what? Let's say Russia has 200,000 troops in Ukraine, or about to come in Ukraine. Some are still in Russia on the border. Only 70,000 of those, I heard, are combat troops. So the actual soldiers with guns that are there to fight, rather than the cook and the chef and the medic, right? And the truck driver, the mechanic. So 70,000 is not 200,000. And when you've got multiple big cities, Kyiv has got 3 million population, size of Chicago. Kharkiv is the second largest city with 1.5 million people, size of Philadelphia. You need a lot of troops to get in there and take the city. I was watching a general right now on CNN, Zweck, another of the big generals, who's been very good. And he was saying, he goes, they don't have enough men. He said, first of all, yeah, they can go into Kyiv and try to take the city and basically try to take the parliament and all the government offices. He goes, it's going to be a disaster for them. It's going to be so bloody. It's going to be so hard. It's going to be, hand-to-hand combat in the streets. He goes, he didn't think they could do it. He goes, it's going to be a disaster. He goes, or they could try to, surround the capital and try to starve it out. But he goes, guess what? They don't have enough men for that, men and women. So I am not saying the Ukrainians are going to win. I'm not saying everything's going great, but everything's going great in terms of the very fact that the Ukrainians are surviving and are so far kind of tied, maybe not even tied, kind of blowing up the Russians, is huge, hugely important. Let me get more of the details. I'm thinking of more things I want to talk about NATO too, but I might as well go through more of the details. Quick little thing. I just saw news since we're on TikTok. TikTok blocked Russian government media websites within the EU by the IP address. So you can no longer check out the TikTok feeds of Russian government media operations if you're in the EU. So good for TikTok. The EU had asked for that, and TikTok agreed. So that was nice. The 3 million convoy, bombed out trucks, the Russian troops, the civilian bombing. Yeah, so the Russians today launched cluster bombs in Kharkiv, the number 2 city that has 1.5 million people. You may have seen, I keep getting my water as we talk, hope you don't mind. You may have seen on the news the video of the bombing, and they said it was hitting civilians, and you saw kind of a big cloud, like, a lot of buildings and a big cloud, but then you noticed all of these almost like firecrackers going off, like boom, 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 right? These little white things. And it was kind of weird because there was already the big cloud. So what was that? Well, those were cluster bombs. And what the cluster bombs are, really scary. They shoot like these big warheads or whatever they do, but they contain lots of little warheads in them. I was looking at a picture online. I would almost say it's a little smaller than a baseball, would be the size to put it. Somewhat smaller than a baseball, but bigger than maybe this kind of, if this is my hand, like this far across. And each of these little balls is a bomblet. A cluster bomb, sort of the cluster bomb whole thing fired at you can have anywhere between 2 of these little bomblets or 20,000 of these little bomblets. And the idea is to throw them out there. They spread out over a wide area, and you've got literally 10 or 20,000 bombs that just go boom, 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 almost like little grenades, right? Well, that's bad. It's very indiscriminate, meaning it's not like it's something you target and you say, we're just going to hit that government ministry. No. You're hitting a city block and you're just killing anybody who's there. Well, the other problem, and Amnesty International and others have pointed this out, is with cluster bombs, which the Russians used this morning in Kharkiv, in the civilian area. I don't know if it was 4% or something like that, but a certain percentage of the weapons don't blow up. So you've got these little balls, a little bit smaller than my fist. You can put it like in the palm of your hand like this. You've got these little bombs falling on the ground and not blowing up. Kids come and they find these cute little balls that are this big, and they're metal and they're cute, and they just invite you to throw them because they're balls, and kids blow their hands off. Let alone civilians in general are going to get killed for these things, because it's literally like now having a minefield of these crazy things in a civilian area. So that's what the Russians are using. The Ukrainians accuse them of a war crime, and if they intentionally targeted the civilian area, if it wasn't some horrific error of direction of the missile or whatever, then it is a war crime. And mind you, there's a whole effort internationally to ban these things in general. That's a whole different question. But very bad, and what it's suggesting is Putin is starting to get desperate, and the more desperate Putin gets, the more he's going to go after civilians to try to basically make them chaos. My guess is to try to make Zelensky, knowing that Zelensky is an honorable man. Clearly, this president of Ukraine, right? I mean, has proven himself to be a god. Seems to be an honorable man. I think Putin is hoping, we're going to see, but Putin is hoping to cause so much civilian carnage that Zelensky finally says, I can't let more of my people die. I'm not convinced that's going to happen, that he's going to do that, but I think we've got more bad things coming for the civilians. Belarus, worth getting into this. I mean, there's a ton of news here. I'm going to talk about Switzerland, about the Russian banks. I mean, it's nonstop. Lots of interesting news. So Belarus is, I can never tell when I do this, like which way it's showing, left or right. But if this is Ukraine, let's just, depending how you're seeing it, hopefully this is west and this is east. If this is west, you've got Belarus kind of up here, which is a independent country with a dictator Lukashenko in charge. Lukashenko, I'm forgetting how to pronounce his name now, but huge dictator who is a Putin puppet. And there is talk. Now, the Russians, first of all, moved their troops in, and Lukashenko let them. He let them attack from Belarus. So one of the 4 fronts that the Ukrainians are fighting is Russian troops coming from Belarus, and possibly some Belarusian troops, they've said. But there's talk now, concern as to whether Belarus, I think I said this earlier, whether Belarus will invade themselves. And The issue is the generals were saying, our generals were saying that, look, the Belarusian troops aren't any better than the Russian troops. They're conscripts. They're drafted. They're young, literally 19 and 20-year-old kids who were 18-year-old kids who were drafted. They're not good fighters. And just like the Russians, and you don't hear them talking about this a lot, I mean, the news and everybody, but the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Belarusians, and even the Greeks, a lot of us, are all Eastern Orthodox. The Bulgarians, we all share one religion. And I'm not very religious personally, but in the region, religion's very, Greece, very strong. Russia, very strong. Ukraine, I'm assuming the same. Very strong religious identity. People just assume you're religious. The idea of, killing the guy who lives next door who is basically of your same religion is really creepy to folks out there who are very religious. It's just, it's just not done. So the big question is how effective the Belarusian troops will be if they come in. But one of the concerns is that Putin may try to get Belarus to declare war. I mean, they already declared war, obviously, but to get them to move the troops in so that, again, let's say we've got Ukraine. They come in the sort of northeast and they come down and they try to block the NATO allies, the borders with NATO. Because currently it's rather dangerous for flights to come in. And we don't know how NATO and countries are sending the weapons. We don't know if they're flying in. We're assuming there's a lot of land transport across NATO countries, and I even wrote down sort of an order. So you've got along that border, Western Ukraine, you've got Belarus, then you've got Poland, then you've got Slovakia, then you've got Hungary, and then Romania. Most likely a lot of this is coming through Poland. But if the Belarusians, who are right to the north and east of Poland, if they come down and try to block this border of Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine, right? They block the border, then they get in the way of not only refugees leaving, but weapons coming in. The question is, can they pull that off? And, we'll see. But it's a concern. The U.S. and the EU. So today, the U.S. and the EU, the European Union, right? The sort of economic organization of many of the European countries, moved against the Russian central bank. This is a big deal because you may have heard people talk about how the Russians have got like $600 billion or billion dollars worth of currency reserves. They've got them in dollars, they've got them in euros, they might even have some crypto. Well, the idea there was the Russians have saved all this money so that if we sanctioned them, they'd have like extra money on hand to kind of get around our sanctions, right? They could pay for goods with cash or something, right? Well, what's happening is, okay, so the EU and Russia, we moved against the Russian central bank to basically stop them from using their currency reserves. Let me see what this is here. The coordinated, I grabbed from the newspaper article so I could get this exactly perfect. The coordinated action blocks the central bank from selling dollars, euros, and other foreign currencies in its reserve stockpile to stabilize the ruble. In other words, they've got all this currency now, but they can't sell it. They can't do anything with it. Now, the effect will be inflation is now very likely to spike. Purchasing power is likely to plummet, meaning the value of the ruble internally, just using the ruble at all, is going to become worth a lot less. And investment is likely to plummet. I'm guessing that means foreign investment, domestic too maybe, but certainly foreign investment in Russia. So that's a big deal. Get rid of that. The one thing they did do is Europe and America carved out an exemption for oil and gas. America, we tend to export. I think we export both. But America, we have enough domestic production. The Europeans, on the other hand, especially Germany, but some of the others, import a lot of oil and gas from Russia. And the concern has been that it's winter still there, and Russia can't really afford to have the oil and gas cut off because they lose the money. But we can't, Europe can't afford to have it cut off because literally it's their heating oil in the winter, right? So there was really no choice but to carve out an exemption because we can't just leave West Germans to freeze to death, blue-collar West Germans, or any West Germans for that matter. So that's what's going on with that. Now, Switzerland. This is fascinating, this one. Switzerland, you may know, country in the middle of Europe. If you can kind of think where France is, you got England, and again, I'm hoping it's showing you not the backwards way. You got England, then you got the English canal. English Channel. I'm starting to speak in French or something. English Channel. You've got France, Spain down here. France is here. Switzerland is down here. Italy is below Switzerland. So it kind of gives you an idea. And then you got to go way over until you get to Ukraine and Russia, right? So Switzerland has traditionally been not just independent. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm forgetting the word I'm using. Neutral. That's it. Neutral. They don't get involved in wars. They don't take sides. Their huge banking economy. I mean, Switzerland's economy is a lot of pharmaceuticals too, but banking. And they banked and guess who loves banking there? The Russian oligarchs, who are the Russian billionaires that Putin helped create, and Putin keeps in power. And Putin, when he decides, he can yank their money, he can throw their butts in jail. And he has. He went after an oligarch he didn't like a few years ago and just accused the guy of corruption and threw his butt in jail. Illegally, but this is Russia. It's a dictatorship, so he was able to do that. So Switzerland, very important to the Western sanctions because it was a banking haven where the banks in the past, they wouldn't help us with sanctions. They wouldn't even give us access to the records. Remember just the whole James Bond thing, how everybody uses a Swiss bank? Because all the criminals could use the banks and it was super secret. Nobody would find out that they were, they had their accounts there. Well, Switzerland just joined the sanctions regime. They joined the EU sanctions. I'm going to read you. I'm grabbing a couple paragraphs from the New York Times. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. So let me read you this real quick. So Switzerland, favorite destination for Russian oligarchs and their money. And exactly, it's not just their money, but the rich billionaire Russian, Putin buddies. They love to go play in Switzerland too because all the chalets and the skiing and the mountains. Think of what am I thinking of? The Sound of Music, but a little bit west. Sound of Music was Austria. This is Switzerland. Same concept, though. Beautiful snow-capped mountains and chalets and all that, right? They oligarchs love that. So announced on Monday that it would freeze Russian financial assets in the country, setting aside a deeply rooted tradition of neutrality. After a meeting with the Swiss Federal Council, Switzerland's president said the country would immediately freeze the assets of Russian President Putin, Prime Minister Mishustin, and Foreign Minister Lavrov, as well as 367 individuals sanctioned last week by the European Union. Again, I'll tell you, anybody who's watching right now who knows foreign policy or knows defense knows what I'm talking about. This is crazy. I mean, this is great crazy, but it's crazy. The idea that I would have never predicted Switzerland would have come on board the sanctions. They don't do that. Now, it's a sign of how bad things are for Russia. It's a sign of how bad things are overall, I think, in terms of, I fear that Switzerland got a private briefing about just how bad things are going to get, about just what Putin is planning, and the Swiss basically, I think, just my guess here, but my political, I've got a foreign policy background, political background, not defense, but I am foreign policy and politics, and my political gut tells me they got a briefing that scared the hell out of them, and that's why they decided to get on board. And I fear that briefing was about the Russians coming in and just decimating the civilians in Ukraine because Putin will be so desperate. For the Swiss to do this, something had to put the fear of God into them. And I think that's what it is. So, good news and bad news. Good news that they're doing it, but bad news because there's something we don't know about why they got involved. And it's not just that somebody, the U.S. or somebody threatened them. Switzerland, we've always threatened them. I mean, not threatened, but we've always told them we want you to get involved. They don't get involved. So the fact that they did is great, but it worries me. NATO membership. So this is kind of funny. I know with this conflict, we've talked about NATO membership with Ukraine and whether they'd get NATO and whether that's really the reason Putin invaded. But there's also the issue of Finland and Sweden. Finland and Sweden are members of the European Union, so the economic group of European countries, but they are not members of NATO. Whereas a lot of their neighbors are members of NATO. For example, you've got Sweden, Denmark, Denmark's down here, Sweden, Norway right here. Norway is a member of NATO. Sweden isn't. Finland's up here. Finland isn't. But you go down, Germany is. Poland is. So a lot of their neighbors are members of NATO, which is our North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the military self-defense organization of most of Europe, Canada, and the United States. It's North Atlantic because it's not just Europe. It's us and Canada too. We love you, Canada. So the discussion now that's happening is whether Finland and Sweden will change their mind and decide to join NATO because they're so freaked out at what Putin is doing and so freaked out. And I think this is also some of the larger discussion on why Europe has come around so much, why Germany has now changed its stance on its defense budget. They're increasing their defense budget they announced by 50% because of what Russia did. They're allowing German weapons now to be given to Ukraine, which is something they never allowed before because of Germany's unique position because of World War II. Germany sort of self-sanctioned itself and said, we have a special obligation in history now not to get involved in wars, so to speak, not to foment wars. And they made an exception for Ukraine because things are so bad there. So taking us back, so Finland, I actually have the poll here. So Finland, the polls. Let me get my glasses. It's easier for me to do this with my reading glasses on. 1 second. Yes, so the earlier poll, where is this? The earlier poll. So the earlier poll in 2017 showed 19% of Finns were in favor of joining NATO, while 53% were against. 19% in favor, 53 against. Today, 53 in favor, before there were 53 against, 53% in favor, 28% against. So the numbers have almost flipped completely. Now, it's still 53% in favor. It's not, it's not an overwhelming majority, but that number has more than doubled. It doubled, basically. The number basically doubled. And it's gone to be a majority now, which is huge. And similar things have happened in Sweden. So, let's see. The Finnish parliament is going to be debating the issue tomorrow. It's not like they're just going to, I worked in the U.S. Senate. They're going to debate. They're not having I don't think they're having a vote or anything. Oh, thank you for the confetti. I don't think they're having a vote or anything on actually joining NATO tomorrow. That's not what they're doing. And, and keep in mind, I'll segue this to talking about Ukraine joining NATO too. You don't just join NATO. You don't just say, I'm joining, and it happens the next day. Love the hearts. Same thing with the EU, which actually, no, I'll start with the EU. I've got them both in order on my page right here. I'll start with the EU first. So one of the other big news today is that Ukraine formally asked to join the European Union. They submitted their paperwork, and they've asked to join. I always love that. I love that hat. Asked to join the EU. And hold on, I had a little bit of more data here because you don't just join the EU automatically. There's a lot of steps you have to go through. So it's not just happening tomorrow. A country can only apply once it satisfies certain conditions, including having a free market economy and stable democracy, important, and accepting all EU legislation as well as the euro as your currency. So whatever the currency is in, what is it in Ukraine? Do folks know? Is it a ruble or not? I don't know if anybody in the comments knows. Type it if you know it, what the currency is in Ukraine. We're going to get to nuclear war. Don't worry. That's on my list, sadly. Someone asked in the comments talking about sort of the issue of nuclear war and those concerns. But you have to accept the euro as well to become an EU member. And then it takes a long time because you've got to negotiate all of these treaties. You've got to slowly implement EU law because there's tons of laws governing not just trade, but also, the products. Like all the kind of laws we have in the States governing, production of products and labeling and all this kind of, is that a witch's hat? I haven't seen that before. Labeling and all that kind of stuff apply within the EU as well. So if you become a member, it's almost like you become a new, actually, it is like you become a new state of the US. You've got to adopt all the US laws and you've got to update all of your local laws. Your factories, the labels you put on your goods have to have the EU languages on them now, all sorts of things. So it'll take time. But it's interesting that that Zelensky, called for it today. The Ukrainians were getting closer to the EU. This is interesting, actually. Back in, I know it's 2013. I always have to double check this date. But when the Russians invaded and took over Crimea in the south, okay, sorry, I got another one of those weird things of somebody thinking they were going to join us on the chat. You are not going to be joining me on this chat. You can join me here on the chat, but you're not joining in the chat. Russia, part of the reason Russia got pissed and took Crimea, well, first of all, okay, Russia, Putin doesn't recognize Ukraine as an independent country at all. He thinks Ukraine is part of Russia, A, and B, it was never independent to start with. He thinks Ukraine is a fake country, and he said so. Because the borders are fake, the country's fake, it's not a real country. So that's part of the reason he thinks he can occupy it. He also claims it's run by Nazis, which is ridiculous. But it's a whole Nazi conspiracy running the country. He claimed the whole government was made of Nazis. And then everyone jumped up and went, well, actually, Mr. Zelensky is a Jew, and his grandfather fought in World War II in the Soviet army against the Nazis, and the grandfather's 3 siblings were killed in the Holocaust because they're Jews. So the Zelenskys are not Nazis. So then Putin switched and said, the government of Ukraine is controlled by, oh that's a cute little hat too, thank you, Crumb. The government of Ukraine is controlled by Nazis. And again, people are like, the Jew is controlled by, seriously? So, whatever. You've got. He was freaking out because in 2013, Ukraine was talking about having some kind of a treaty with the EU. They weren't joining the EU, but I think they were going to join sort of the trade union, sort of they could start to trade within the EU. It was sort of the first steps towards joining. Putin freaks out. The sort of dictator-ish guy in charge, who was a Putin puppet, Putin gets upset, so he changes his mind and says, oh, we're not going to do this. So the people rose up and overthrew the guy because he was a Putin puppet, and they were like, no, we want to join the EU. So anyway, Zelensky announced today and applied to join the EU. Big deal. It's another example of how this is backfiring on Putin, because he claimed he's worried about Ukraine getting too close to Europe, and what did he do? He pushed Ukraine closer. Now, the other issue, NATO. Putin has claimed, and he's pretty much lying, but he's claimed that, well, actually, he is lying about this aspect. He claimed, the Ukrainians are going to, thanks for the gloves, or the fighting mitts, the Ukrainians are about to join NATO, and I've got to stop it because then the enemy is at my border, blah, 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 blah. The Ukrainians were not about to join NATO. The Ukrainians have wanted to join NATO for like 14 years. And NATO was like, you're not ready. They were not about to join NATO. There was literally nothing going on this year they weren't any closer to joining NATO this year than they were years ago, right? Nothing was going on. And again, keep in mind, Putin has given multiple speeches this week where he's made clear. The problem is he doesn't think Ukraine exists at all. He thinks it's a part of Russia, and he's pissed off that when the Soviet Union, remember the sort of the big Soviet Russian dictatorship that had eaten a bunch of other countries? Well, when they fell apart in 1991, the other 14 or so countries broke away. So all these other parts they were part of the Soviet Union, but they were these separate republics. So you had like the Russian Republic, the Ukrainian Republic, Lithuanian Republic, Latvian, Estonian. Well, all of them broke away now and they're independent countries. Putin's pissed. Some Russians are, the ones who like Stalin are pissed, and wants, Magna Russia, the larger Russia, back. So that's what's going on. Now, I did write down really quick what the rules are, what the requirements are for joining NATO, and I think when I read them, you'll see. It's like, it'll be interesting to see if even if they could join, if Ukraine is ready, but you've got to have a functioning democratic political system based on a market economy, which I think they do. Fair treatment of minority populations, I think so, but I'm not an expert on minorities in Ukraine. A commitment to the peaceful resolution of conflicts. Again, I think Ukraine does, because the idea there is you're not just some country that's always declaring war on your neighbors and nabbing land. In other words, Russia, right? Russia could not join NATO. They have not established that they are committed to the peaceful resolution of conflicts. They're not. Ukraine, I think, probably is. The ability and willingness to make a military contribution to NATO operations. In other words, you provide some of your troops to NATO, and when NATO troops go to as peacekeepers, for example, we've got NATO peacekeepers in the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, you're willing to send some of your people there. And again, I think Ukraine would do that. And a commitment to democratic civil military relations and institutional structures, meaning that your military gets it that civilians are in charge of the military. The military isn't in charge of the military. So like in the US, the Secretary of Defense is always a civilian. Now in our case right now, our current Secretary of Defense is former military, but he's a civilian now, and it's always got to be, by American law, the Secretary of Defense has to be a civilian, and he is accountable, and the Defense Department is accountable to a civilian president. So therefore, you have to have something similar in place to join NATO, that your military, in other words, you're not a military dictatorship. The military is accountable to a democratic government. So anyway, that's the stuff that Ukraine needs to join NATO. It's not going to happen right now. One of the problems, even if NATO wanted to sort of stick it to Putin, is because the Russians, even before this invasion, because the Russians have stolen Crimea in the south of Ukraine, they've stolen the Ukrainian territory of Crimea and have annexed it and claims it's Russian. If Ukraine became a part of NATO, immediately NATO would become involved in a war with Russia, because Russia would be annexing and occupying NATO territory, which is illegal. So, I think the Crimea thing would have to get figured out first before we're able to figure it out. But who knows? Maybe I don't know what we'd do. Maybe we'd carve something out and make an exception for Crimea and say, we're not declaring war over Crimea, or at least not now. I don't know, something like that. So the peace talks were today. I think yesterday they may have started. Initially, the Russians, God, as the Southerners say, God bless them. What was it? God bless their hearts. That's it. That's what the Southern Americans say. Bless their hearts. I'm just forgetting with this too. Yeah, there's no way I can put on subtitles for the live. That's too bad. I don't think I can. If I can, tell me here, folks. But I forgot about that because I forget we've got people from around the world reading this too. Also, people hard of hearing, but I don't think we've got that. In any case, peace talks. So Putin had proposed that they have peace talks in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, which is his puppet state on the border that just invaded Ukraine. And as if the Ukrainians are going to like go over to the guy who just invaded them and go to his country for talks. Now, they're not stupid. They said no. Also, quick historical aside, the Russians pulled this stunt during the 1956 uprising in Hungary. Hungary was part of the Soviet bloc, the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern European countries that the Soviets were occupying and had turned them into communist states. The citizens couldn't leave. They were trapped. Horrific, right? Well, Hungary has this democratic uprising, and the Soviets decide they want to negotiate. So they invite the leader of the uprising, Nagy is his last name, Nagy, to their embassy to talk. The second he walks in the door, they kill him. This is what the Russians do. So anyway, they finally decided to meet along the border with Russia and Belarus, with Ukraine and Belarus in the northwest. Smart. And they talked for 5 hours, didn't agree to anything. They did agree to continue the discussions with which, people in diplomacy said that's about the best you could hope for because it's not clear what they're going to agree on. But I love the list came out of what the Russians' demands were at the peace talks today. 1, recognition of Russian sovereignty over Crimea. So they want the Ukrainians to say, that land you stole from us back in 2013, it's totally yours. Like Ukraine's going to do that. 2, demilitarization of Ukraine. So Ukraine would have to give up its entire military. I mean, look what's happening to them right now. The Russians are bombing their cities. Why would they want to give up their... The only reason like Russia hasn't annexed the entire country right now is because Ukraine has a military. So they're not demilitarizing. The denazification of the Ukrainian state, again, that crazy Nazi thing, where he's claiming like Nazis run through... Nobody knows what... I mean, that's some pablum that Putin is using to try to get domestic support at home because, as I'm sure you guys know, or at least have heard, you've heard about the history of World War II and how, well, okay, let's tell all the history. The Russians were in cahoots with the Germans to start with, and they had a non-aggression pact. So the Russians weren't exactly the good guys at the beginning of World War II. They actually struck a deal with Hitler. But the deal kind of fell apart because Hitler, kind of an ass, doesn't keep his agreements, and the Russians go to war with Hitler. Well, the Russians had a horrific war. Germany trying to move to Moscow over a winter, and Leningrad, which now is St. Petersburg, but Leningrad, horrific winter. They talk about 20 million Russians possibly dying in this war. I mean, horrific war, and it is stuck in the Russian memory of how bad the fight against the Nazis and how bad Nazis are. So that's why Putin keeps bringing up Nazis, because I don't know what to... I guess, you know what? Nazis to Russians would be what communists are to Americans. How Americans use... I think rightfully during the Soviet years would talk about the communist countries being evil, but now Republicans, and if you're foreigners you may not know this, but Republicans in our country will always accuse Democrats of being socialists and communists. And in the American mind, that doesn't mean, Swedish socialists, it means Soviets. So that's what they're trying to do. So Putin's kind of doing the same thing. He's accusing them of being Nazis because he's saying they're just like Hitler, and he's hoping to get the Russian heart angry because the Russians the Russians know what it's like to fight Nazis, right? So anyway, these talks are clearly going nowhere. Ukrainian airstrikes. This was a weird story from the Ukrainian paper, and I asked some defense friends who agreed with me. It was a little strange, but Poland, and some of the other Eastern European countries that are part of NATO are sending fighter jets to Ukraine. Actually, they sent them. They arrived earlier today. They announced they were sending them, and then I saw a tweet that said they're an hour away. They arrived. Some people were asking, so they're asking, like, how do the Ukrainians fly these things? You've got to be trained. Well, apparently, and I'll even read for anybody who's geeky, I'll read you a little bit of the detail, but the Ukrainians fly a version of a MiG-29, which is a Russian plane, Soviet plane, that some of the former Soviet states or the former Soviet satellite states also fly. So they're not the same thing, but they're close enough that you can learn to fly it pretty easily. So you've got a Soviet-made MiG-29 in Ukraine. You've got a NATO nations, Poland, Slovakia, and Bulgaria also fly the MiG-29. Okay? Bulgaria flies another one. So you've got 3 of the NATO countries that fly the same Soviet-made fighter jet or a similar one to what Ukraine flies. That's how these jets will help. Now, there was a weird story in the Ukrainian press that a journalist was sharing, Alec Lun, who's very good on Twitter, Luhn, for updates on Russia and the region if you use Twitter. But he tweeted a story that said, from the Ukrainian paper, so who knows, that they were talking about using Polish bases to launch the attacks on the Russian troops, on the Russian planes and everything else. In other words, the Ukrainian pilots would fly the jets, fly back to Poland, refuel the jets, sleep, whatever they do, and then fly out of Poland for another attack. Let's see if that comes true. That would certainly put us in a more dangerous position in terms of having a battle, because it would potentially invite the Russians to then bomb the Polish airports, and if the Russians bomb the Polish airports, then we're at war. We're at war. So just keep an eye on that story. I've got a lot of little tidbit stories too that are pretty good, that will make you feel good if you have not heard about these yet. Oh, and I always forget to tell people as I'm doing this, follow me, please. Make sure you hit the follow button. I am doing these videos, but I've got a lot of other, well, you'll see. Go see my videos. I've been really doubling down on the Ukraine stories, and I'm just going to keep doing this until Ukraine's free, hopefully. But some of the fun stories that popped up today. A second military vehicle was stolen by a second Russian military vehicle was stolen by a Ukrainian farmer. I've got both videos up, but you may have seen yesterday there's a video of this Russian, people were saying it's a tank, but it wasn't a tank. My intelligence friend said it actually is a vehicle much more important than a tank. It's some kind of a radar vehicle. And my guess is it's one of these radar for coordinating everything going on around you, what's in the air, everything, like really important when you're doing a war. And the Russians just whether it ran out of gas, they just lost it. They left it behind. And he said it's crazy they left it behind. This thing's way more valuable than a tank. Well, there's video of a Ukrainian farmer has hooked up to this incredibly expensive, incredibly important Russian war machine and is dragging it through through the road next to his farm. And there's apparently a Russian soldier running after the guy at full speed trying to stop him. And the guys in the car that are filming this are just howling at the top of their lungs. Well, it happened again today. There's another video of a Ukrainian farmer. You can even see the Ukrainian flag in front, and he's towing another Russian military vehicle, and this one even has, I think, the Z on it or whatever, right, for the Russian vehicles. And there's two Ukrainian women, in front of their home. It's like something out of a movie because the camera's behind them, and you see them kind of sitting there, looking, and their heads are just going like this. And the one woman, she goes, like sayonara, and the tractor beeps at them twice to say hi. It was this little 9-second video that was just glorious. But and I've got a lot of other examples like this. This is the kind of stuff that's going on. This is the kind of stuff that says the Ukrainians know how to kick ass. It boosts morale here, but it also boosts morale in Ukraine. That they hear these stories, they see these videos, they go, yeah. But it also shows you just how gutsy these people are. I mean, the Ukrainians are just, I tweeted about it and called them the honey badger of Europe. If you ever saw that video, honey badger don't care. Honey badger kicks the snake's ass. They're just like little college wrestlers or something. I don't know what they are. Stool wrestlers. But the military... Russia was kicked out of the World Cup. Oh, money. I like TikTok money if it's real money. Russia was kicked out of the World Cup today. I am not a big soccer fan, or football, as the rest of the world calls it. Americans' football is something else. But soccer, is, I'll say. Russians were kicked out by FIFA, the governing body. They are, as I read the story correctly, not being the soccer expert, but they're in the preliminaries, or what do you call it, the qualifying rounds where the teams play each other for a spot in the tournament. Russia, I think, had one more round to play or one more game to play to qualify potentially, and FIFA said, you're not coming. You're just not coming. So the Russians are out of the World Cup, which even Americans know. There are a lot of Americans into the World Cup. I'm not, but a lot are nowadays. Soccer has really taken off here. But even Americans not into sports like me know the World Cup is the Super Bowl of the world. I mean, it's the biggest sport event of the world. And the Russians not being able to go, I got chills even telling you, the Russians not being able to go is one big haha. So that's great. Oh God, Ukrainian civilians with their Molotov cocktails. I've got a couple different videos, again, just things to keep in mind later because they're interesting videos of some Ukrainians. I put one up today of some Ukrainians with Molotov cocktails in their car following a Russian convoy of military vehicles. Now, Molotov cocktails, quite simply, are gasoline bombs that civilians make, named after a Russian, which is kind of funny, Molotov. But basically, I mean, from what I've gleaned, because it's so simple online, but you take a Coke bottle, you fill it with gas, you put you get a wick that is basically, like my white T-shirt. You just get a strip like this, put the strip down into the gas and hanging out of the Coke bottle, and then they fill it like with styro. They showed a video yesterday of these old women, these old Ukrainian grandmas, the babushka, as they say in Russia, carving out the corks out of styrofoam, and you put the cork in, it pushes, so it holds the gas in, and it holds the wick in, and you simply light the. Now I'm wondering whether you actually put some gas, or actually my guess is the gas probably seeps up so the wick has gas, so it's wet enough that it stays, you light it and it stays lit. If you didn't have gas on the wick, you'd run the risk of it just petering out. So you light this, you throw them at tanks, and it explodes when it hit the tank or any military vehicle or military person. It explodes because the glass breaks and it throws gasoline everywhere, and you have a huge gasoline fire. Well, this video is kind of amazing. Look for it in my feed. These Ukrainians in their car, I think it's at least 3 people. The driver, of course, the driver's filming as he's driving. Of course, that was what was going on. The driver's filming, woman next to him, guy in the back seat. Woman and the guy both have Molotov cocktails. They both light them and throw them, and it's a very quick scene. And you see literally the cocktail hit the armored vehicle and how the fire spreads. And I mean, pretty good fire. The problem is they were doing it from their car, and I think some of the gas splashed back. And all of a sudden, the woman's arm was like on fire. She put it out, but it was very scary. So, I mean, I don't need to tell you guys don't do this at home. Obviously, you shouldn't be making Molotov cocktails. Very illegal and dangerous thing to do. But if you're in a war like this, it was tremendous to watch. Now, I'd mentioned the other night, I'd asked my military friend why Molotov cocktails actually work. Because I said, well, I don't quite get it. I mean, you're throwing some fire on the side of a tank. I mean, come on. These tanks are... some of them have reactive armor and everything else to protect against shells coming in. Is fire going to make a difference? His point was that when you're inside a small, metal box in a tank, you've got air conditioning and things like that, like the purifying the air and bringing the air in and out. If you've got a fire on the outside of your tank, you run the danger of all that horrible smoke and everything coming into the vehicle, even pulling the fire into the vehicle. And not just you choking inside a closed-in small metal claustrophobic box, but also the air intake for the engine. Because I'm assuming these engines work like every other engine. My dad was a big auto executive. I'm not a big car guy, but I do know you put fuel, you put oxygen, they mix together, they light on fire. You need some air coming in. If the air is coming in with this, deadly smoke and everything, it messes up the engine. So these Molotov cocktails could be quite helpful. But what's fascinating is these son of a bitches drove their car up to this convoy and drove right next to it and are just throwing stuff out the way. I mean, they could have all been killed. Could have all been killed by being shot. But I think the Russians are so not prepared for this, and the Russians, from what we're seeing of the POWs who are talking, they don't want to be there. They're crying, thanks to the flame. They're upset about being there. These are their brothers. So I think they're not even expecting the Ukrainians to do this, but they are. Sort of jumping. The mechanic. This is another feel-good story. Some of the stuff I'm trying to give you are news updates, and other ones are just the funny feel-good news of what's going on, because I think that's important too. As somebody said earlier to me, she said, I don't even know if I can watch this stuff anymore because it's just getting me so down. And I say it's feel-good. A Ukrainian mechanic, an ethnic Ukrainian mechanic, working for an oligarch, a Russian, actually a Russian oligarch, who's one of the rich billionaires that Putin put in power, and Putin kind of controls his strings, is working on the yacht of the $7 million or $8 million yacht of the billionaire in Mallorca, Spain. And he sees the news of the Russians, it wasn't even today's news of the cluster bombs, but yesterday when the Russians shot a mortar shell or something into a high-rise Ukrainian apartment building, I believe in Kharkiv. And remember, it killed at least 2 people, just carved a scary hole out of the side of this apartment building. It could have knocked down the whole building, killed hundreds of people. He said once he saw that, he'd had it. The oligarch is a Russian who runs a defense company and sells helicopters to the Russian army. And once he saw that, he said, screw it. I don't care what happens to me. This guy's a son of a bitch. He's killing my people. I'm sinking his boat. And he half sunk the boat. I think half sunk because either it probably hit the ground or they ran in to stop it. But the son of a bitch tried to sink the boat and actually sank a good amount of it. Was arrested by the Spanish police. He said, I'd do it again. But I mean, again, this is the Ukrainian spirit. Oh God, this one's great. This one you're going to love. If you haven't, again, the video, I did not post this video because it clearly came from another TikTok. And I don't think that's right. I'm not going to steal my TikTok videos, my videos from other TikTokers. So I did not use the video because it's from another TikToker, but I got the transcript. This one's fabulous. Hold on. I get thirsty talking. This one is a refueling tanker that refuels boats. And the guy in charge, at least for the day, the acting captain or whatever, is a Georgian from Soviet Georgia, which is now an independent country. And the Russians have also invaded and occupied and still occupy part of Georgia. They took some of their land too. So the Russian boat hails the refueling tank. And the Georgian goes, the guy running the refueling tank, I'm going to try to do like a different voice so you get it. Are you from Russia? Yes, from Russia. I see, a ship from Russia. Guys, we refuse to refuel. We refuse to refuel you. Who am I talking to? The Russian says. You are talking to a senior mate from Georgia. Knowing the Russians are going to know exactly what's going on because the Georgians, right? Who you invaded and you stole our land. We will not refuel your ship. Russian ship, go fuck yourself. Now that's a takeoff, which I'm sure you know of, these 13 Russian military men and women who were stationed on a small island in southern Ukraine, and the Russians came in and said, "We're going to take you, or we're blowing you up." And they said, "Russian warship, go fuck yourself." And the story today is they may not be dead. Initially, we thought the Russians killed them all. They may actually be prisoners of war. But the story went around the world of the bravery of these. Imagine, literally, this huge Russian naval ship is offshore, ready to shell you and blow you up, and you just tell them, "You know what, Russian warship, go fuck yourself," when they ask you to surrender. So the Georgian says to the Russian fuel ship, "Russian ship, go fuck yourself," alluding to that. And then his buddy on the bridge goes, "Fucking occupiers." So he starts jumping in. The Russian guy now says, the Russian ship captain goes, "Guys, leave the politics. We're almost out of fuel." This is all happening in Russian. And he's just here because he's like, come on, I need fuel. I'm not political. The first Georgian guy goes, "Well," and he says this really slowly, "Well, if you are almost out of fuel, you can use the paddles. So that you can row your boat back to Russia." And Georgian number 2 jumps in and goes, "Go fuck yourselves." And then Georgian number 1 says, "Glory to the heroes, glory to Ukraine." And the video ends. I mean, it's like a Saturday Night Live skit. It was just amazing, absolutely amazing. But again, these guys weren't even Ukraine. They weren't even Ukrainian. But you're seeing this kind of support for Ukraine around the world. Really amazing. Actually, I'm going to give you a really horrible story now, and then let's jump in. I know it's 8 o'clock my time, but I'm going to go another 20 minutes or so because I want to get into the where do we go from here, who can win, what's a solution, etc. But one last story of the Ukrainian UN ambassador to the United Nations spoke today and said they found the cell phone of a Russian soldier, young guy, Russian service member, who was killed, in gunfire with the Ukrainians. And I think he was like 19 or 20, and they found the text messages he was sending back and forth to his mom right before he died. And I'm going to read you this in English, what was written. So the mom says to him, whatever his name is, Lev or something, "Why has it been so long since you responded? Are you really in training exercises?" And he says, "Mom, I'm no longer in Crimea. I'm not in training exercises." And his voice is, really upset. "Where are you then? Papa is asking where I can send you a parcel, a package." "What kind of He says, "Mom, what kind of a parcel can you send me?" He hasn't told her yet he's in Ukraine, but he's thinking, I'm in the middle of a freaking war. What are you going to send me? He goes, "What kind of a parcel can you send me?" And I spent a lot of time fact checking this today because one of the things you will find if you follow my feed is I try not to post BS. I've got my own political opinions, but I am trying to keep this apolitical in the sense of America left or right. We're keeping this we are here to help Ukraine, guys. So we're not getting into the whole Trump versus Biden thing and all that. But I try to make sure stuff is real before I post it. I won't just post something that Joe Blow has posted on Twitter and I have no idea. I have no idea even who Joe Blow is, right? In this case, the transcript has the son saying in English, the Ukrainian government translated this, "Mom, what kind of a parcel can you send me?" And he says, "I just want to hang myself now." Now the transcript says hang myself. I know very little Russian. I studied a little. I Googled it and stuff, and I saw the translation as sort of go up, turn around. Called my lawyer friend who's bilingual, and then she looked at some sources, and basically there are many translations for that word. At its best, this guy said, I just want to get the fuck. He said desperately, I just want to get the fuck out, the hell out of here. I just want to go home. At worst, he said, I want to kill myself. We don't know which, because the word can be interpreted both ways. Now, my friend, who's the bilingual Russian expert, she said that the mom's response, in her opinion, makes it clear he said, I want to kill myself. I want to hang myself to get out of here. Because the mother responded, and she said it was, because she had the original Russian. She said the way it was written, and you could tell what the mother was saying was, the mother says, what are you talking about? What happened? And the way she wrote it was literally like, oh my God, what are you saying? What happened to you? Because I said, well, what if he was just saying, what if he was crying and just saying, Mom, I want to go home? She would say what happened, but the way she said, what are you talking about? She literally means it as, what did you just say? Kind of a thing. That would be a response to your kid saying, I want to kill myself. Horrific. He says, Mom, and then he gives the sort of soliloquy, and it's the last thing he typed, and he died moments thereafter. Mom, I'm in Ukraine. Again, Mom had no idea. There is a real war raging here. I'm afraid. We are bombing all of the cities, even targeting civilians. We were told that they would welcome us, meaning the Ukrainians would welcome the Russian troops coming in, because remember, the Nazis were running Ukraine and the people were being oppressed. The people will welcome you when you throw off the Nazi government, right? We were told they would welcome us, and instead they're falling under our armored vehicles, throwing themselves under the wheels, meaning of his tanks and their armored personnel carriers, throwing themselves under the wheels and not allowing us to pass. In other words, Ukrainian citizens are literally throwing themselves, and this is a Russian saying it, throwing themselves in front of these vehicles to stop it, so that hopefully the Russians stop, or if they don't, they run over you and kill you, but hopefully your body lying there in front of a tank will be enough to stop you. His next words, they call us fascists. Mama, this is so hard. And then he died. Horrible story. Tells you a lot about what's going on with Russian morale. Tells you a lot about these poor kids. I mean, I know, and again, I know it's kind of weird in a way because the Russians are doing horrific things to the Ukrainians, but I think it is important from a human perspective to see what's going on with these poor kids. A lot of these kids were just roped into this as young kids, didn't even know they were going to war. They thought they were, mind you, they were drafted. This is compulsory military. It's not like they volunteered to join. This is compulsory Russian military. So they're just young kids doing their draft out of high school. Just really sad. Now, let's get to the questions. I mean, I'm sort of weaving them into what I was talking about because some of you were asking about the different topics I brought up here anyway. But likelihood of Russia using its nukes, and what would the international response be? Boy, is that a question. There is concern. There is legitimate concern among U.S. experts that Russia could use its nukes. Apparently, Russian military doctrine, unlike American military doctrine, Russian military doctrine includes using tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield, meaning they don't really have a problem with using small nukes that you would shoot, artillery nukes or whatever you would shoot on a battlefield to blow up, whatever, but it's not a nuke you would necessarily drop into, Hiroshima, that a citywide bomb. They're little friendly nukes, right? And the Russians wouldn't have a problem using them as a weapon of last resort. And in other words, their military policy isn't, oh no, like American, basically we would only use nukes to retaliate because otherwise it's nuclear war. Like if they nuked us, we nuke them. The Russians, doesn't have to be retaliation. So that's concerning. Putin has mentioned nukes 3 times this week. He's either hinted at it or mentioned it. That's concerning because it's kind of cuckoo. Normal, rational leaders don't mention, we're going to nuke you. I mean, Trump did it with North Korea, but again, it was kind of a problem when, again, I'm not trying to get political here, but that was some of the criticism is you really don't want the American president or any president talking about nuking another country. It can really destabilize things fast. Putin, God knows what's going on in this man's head, but he brought it up 3 times. I generally don't think he's going to use nukes, but I think at least where things are right now, he's getting desperate. I think he's going to kill a lot of civilians. He's going to have to try to take Kyiv, the capital, or at least Kharkiv, the number 2 city. And I think he doesn't care who he kills. He showed that today with the cluster bombs. Remember the thousands of little bombs, like little balls that just he shot at a civilian residential area today, basically a war crime. So I'm really worried about, the war crimes and the damage he's going to do, and the nuclear thing. What scares me is watching the experts on TV like James Clapper, former director of national intelligence for the U.S., very smart guy. I like him a lot, respect him a lot. He's worried about it. He thinks something's going. He thinks Putin's unhinged, and he says the fact that he's mentioning the nukes, he's a little worried. So I don't know. If Putin were to use them, if Putin uses nukes, we're at war. I think we're at war. I don't think there's any. I don't know. I don't know what we do. I don't know what we would do. But I think it's the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, but it's all bets are off at that point. We're at war with Russia if they use nukes. It's not like at that point Biden is not going to sit there and say, well, we promised we wouldn't have U.S. troops be involved. I think especially if they're battlefield nukes, then you would have at least U.S. fighters coming in and NATO fighters coming in and just blowing the hell out of any Russian troops in that area, not going after Moscow, but saying, you shot a nuclear weapon from this area, from your troops that are engaging in Ukraine, we are going to destroy your troops who are engaging in Ukraine. I don't think there's any choice, because also you need to send the message to the rest of the world that if you use, in today's day and age, if you use nukes, you're done. And then it would be a war crime, by the way, too. And it would be, you would also see sanctions. I think you'd see an economic embargo of Russia. It would just be, like boat embargo. It would be horrific. That's right, retired vets. Yeah, there are a number of retired. Somebody asked one of the questions. There are a number of retired vets, like a group of 10 of them from, where's the countries? 3 Brits, 6 U.S. citizens, and a German who were trained military guys in NATO and are volunteering in Ukraine, because the president, Zelensky, has asked for volunteers from all over the world. So yes, there are some vets going, not a total number, but they were apparently a special operations team. So actually, a 10-member special operations team from NATO going to work for, they're not doing it on behalf of NATO, they're retired, going to work for Ukraine is huge. Because that's some kick-ass military power there. Somebody asked, how did Putin get voted in? He cheated because they're not a democracy. Seriously, that's the simple answer. It's a much longer story, but they cheated. He kills his political opponents. He jails them. He killed one. What was it? Nementsov? I'm going to pronounce his name. I feel very bad now. If somebody knows, please put the name in the comments. Nementsov. I would Google it as we're talking. Just killed this poor guy. And he, because I'm talking to you, I'm going to forget. I can even looking at his face right now. The opposition leader, who he now jailed, the guy he kept poisoning, and poisoned this guy repeatedly. And the guy, Nementsov, thank you. And the poison, he also poisoned Nementsov, and then finally they killed him walking near Red Square. But the Navalny, Alexei Navalny is the other opposition leader who, refuses to put him on the ballot. So they do these kind of tricks too for the elections, and then poisoned him repeatedly. Navalny keeps coming back to Russia. God bless the man, but that's like Ukrainian spirit, coming back to Russia. So Putin just threw him in jail for, some trumped up charge. This is why Putin wins elections, because whenever he has any political threat, he kills them or throws them in jail. It's a dictatorship. Anonymous, people asked really quick. This has been kind of amazing. Anonymous has gotten involved. Some of you know who they are, others may not. I'm gonna say this probably poorly, but Anonymous is a computer hacker collective. I'll leave it at that. Decentralized, all over the world. From what I understand, they don't really have a centralized body, so there isn't a king of Anonymous. It's not. It's not like they have branches, but they're a loosely connected network of computer hackers who try to do things for justice and good. It's not the same thing as sort of the Assange thing and all of that. It's literally these guys. Well, this time they've decided to go after. They went after a Russian bank, and they stole all the documents from the Russian bank and published them online, which I'm sure the CIA and the the European intelligence services are going to love going through that. They knocked out a bunch of the Russian government websites, the Kremlin site, a bunch of them. They knocked out a bunch of the Russian media sites, and on the media sites, they knocked out the page and put up some writing that said basically, you're being lied to. They're not telling you the truth of what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, I would love it if somebody wrote like a really good, somebody like me who can write, but somebody wrote like a really good one-page synopsis. Like take everything I'm telling you guys tonight, but write it as maybe 2 paragraphs and just slap that up there so they know how many deaths, what's going on, your people don't have food, your people don't have water, they don't have gas, but just so these guys can actually, the Russians can actually see the news. Just looking to see what else is interesting here. NATO expansion, we kind of talked about that. The fighter planes, we talked about. Belarus voted on Sunday to amend its constitution to basically permit it to no longer be non-aligned and for it to align itself with Russia and to permit Russian nukes on its territory. And that starts to get scary because now you've got a previously not nuclear country that is going to have nuclear weapons on the border with Poland, among other places. That's a little scary. So, and Lithuania too. So, not great. I mean, I don't think we're going to have a Cuban Missile Crisis with Belarus getting nukes, but it's, all of this will have to be dealt with, I think, and I don't know how it's going to be dealt with. I'm going to go with, okay, so the last question. And then we can still wait. If I can get your guys' comments here, because I know they fly by so quickly, but I think I can get a couple questions here. The last question was kind of a combination. How will this end? What's the most realistic option? What's the most optimistic option? That's tough. We don't know how it's going to, obviously we don't know how it's going to end, but I think, initially we all thought Ukraine was going to get crushed. It didn't. Right there is a perfect example of how predicting the future in politics or in anything doesn't always work because there's a lot of variables. And if you get some of the in this case, one variable was the strength of the Russian army. Another variable was the strength of the Ukraine resistance. Well, the Russian army wasn't this, they were this. The Ukraine resistance wasn't this, it was this. Down to Ukrainian grandmas making literally videos yesterday of Ukrainian grandmas making Molotov cocktail gasoline bombs. Crazy stuff, right? So it's hard to predict what's coming. What the experts are saying, and I would agree, is Russia can certainly obliterate Ukraine. They're not going to be able to annex it. They're not going to be able to sort of win the war. They may take over. They may invade all of Kyiv, the capital, but they're not going to be able to control the capital. Because, frankly, you've got a bunch of crazy-ass honey badger Ukrainians who are going to be throwing bombs and throwing their bodies and shooting from every street corner, from every, baby carriage. They're going to be shooting these guys on every freaking corner. And the Russians are freaked out. We know they're freaked out. We know their kids. There was a quote yesterday from one of the Russians that was intercepted, one of the poor, the poor young recruits, and he said, "We don't even know who to shoot. They all look like us." They're freaked out that these guys, they were always brought up knowing Ukraine's kind of your brother. They're just like us. They're, the same religion. They look like us. They're Slavs. They just happen to be a different country, but very similar food, blah, 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 right? So it's, where it goes from here, the Russians can take over everything, but they can't hold it. They're not going to be able to pacify, from what all the experts are saying, they do not have enough troops to pacify Kyiv and to pacify the country. Now, had they been smart, I think, they probably should have just gone for, there was these eastern provinces, the alleged breakaway provinces. They're not breakaway provinces. They're just part of Ukraine where the Russians have been funding some terrorists to claim, we want to be independent because the Ukrainians are oppressing us or whatever, right? So Russia moves in there and declares them independent states now. And of course, Russia will annex them next. That'll be the next thing. The independent state president will say, please, Russia, annex us. And Russia will say, since you asked. Russia also so that's here on the east of Ukraine. South of Ukraine, I haven't seen that before, the sea thing. South of Ukraine, you've got Crimea, which is the Ukrainian land that the Russians invaded and annexed back in 2013 or so. But there's Ukrainian land in between. And clearly the Russians at least are going to want to, invade and take a segment right along here, along the Black Sea. So they've got Crimea, land connection, crazy breakaway, not breakaway republics that Russia claims broke away, and Russia. And they're going to make it all Russia. That's what Russia wants as a minimum, I think, but I'm not sure they're going to get away with it. There was a town, I say small town because I'm from Chicago originally, but a town of 100,000 people, Berdyansk or something, It's one of the, I, again, put a video up earlier today about them, and it shows, again, sort of a Russian column of not tanks, but other military vehicles parked in front of what must be some government buildings or something. They're trying to take this town of 100,000 people, and the entire freaking town turned out to yell at these guys. And you've got, I mean, it's like, it looks like a couple hundred people from this town who just turned out, that wasn't the whole town, of course, but a couple hundred people who turned out just to yell and, free Ukraine, glory to Ukraine, go home. They're gonna, if they try to hold this land, they're gonna have every Ukrainian, they're gonna have to worry about anybody they see is gonna shoot them. This is not friendly territory. So I don't know what's gonna happen. I wonder, this is actually, somebody had sort of asked this question too, so one of your questions, but I've been thinking about it. Could somebody get rid of Putin? Some people have said, could we get rid of Putin, right? Well, we can't get rid of Putin because if we shoot Putin, then it could be nuclear war if they find out. So, probably not a good idea. Very good idea for somebody else to do it, but we can't do it. Could there be a Russian military coup? I was talking with my Russian expert friend today, the lawyer, and she was saying, the problem is, as she had an interesting comparison. She said, look at Donald Trump. And again, I'm not being political here at all, even if you support Trump, but you'll know what I'm talking about. Donald Trump does a really good job of scaring everybody around him into loyalty, of not standing up to him, right? Remember, even Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney stood up and gave that speech at the convention, and then after Trump won, Mitch had lunch with him looking for a job. Trump does a really good job of scaring the people around him. He does evoke loyalty, but he also scares them into not taking him on. Well, Trump isn't gonna, in principle, Trump isn't gonna kill you. Trump can't take billions of dollars away from you, and Trump can't throw your ass in jail. Putin can, has, and will. So if a simple force of personality of a leader can scare people around them from taking them on, imagine what a leader in Russia can do, who literally kills his political opponents, who literally throws them in jail, who literally poisons them, and who would take away all their money and make them bankrupt. She thought it was unlikely that the military or anybody else would take on Putin and try to overthrow him. I still wonder, just politically speaking, if at some point you couldn't have a military coup, just because he's made a mockery. First of all, he's moved most of his military to that border to start with, which is rather dangerous for them. What if, we're not going to do it, but the Russians think we're warmongers. What if we decided to invade the Russian Far East right now? Come through Alaska. They don't have any troops. Their troops are all in Ukraine, which is, mind you, like 12 or 13 time zones to the west. Crazy distance, right? Or what if China attacks and comes up to try to grab some land? Really dangerous position. He's proven that the Russian military basically sucks. They're, as I said, maybe the level of Iraq 2003 or less. They fight like a third world country. That's embarrassing as hell. And if it's true that some of the military guys had tried to tell Putin this and Putin didn't listen, or Putin so threatened them. Remember what he did to that intelligence chief last week? There's a video of Putin trying to get opinions from his cabinet about, should we recognize these two provinces in eastern Ukraine as independent states? And he gets to his intelligence chief. And hold on, this was amazing. If you don't know the story, you can Google it because you can see the conversation and then with it translated. He asks the guy, and the guy, the body language of all of these guys is like this with their shoulders, as if you don't want to be called on by teacher or something, right? And the guy's stuttering and stumbling, and Putin's just jumping in and going, speak up, I can't hear you. Stop stumbling, stop stammering. And the guy says, well, what do you mean you think it might be, what do you mean you think it's a good idea? Is it a good idea or isn't it a good idea? Do you support it? What do you mean you would support it? Do you support it or don't you support it? And the guy gives an answer, he goes, that's not a correct answer, that's not a clear answer. He's just belittling this guy, and this man basically looks like, this 50-year-old man who's an intelligence chief of Russia looks like a small child who just wants to crawl into his little turtle shell. Putin has, so that's the concern, is that he's got everybody so scared that they wouldn't mount an attack on him. But again, the flip side of that is he won't listen to his intelligence chiefs, he wouldn't listen to his military chiefs, and he just showed the world that Russia's military sucks and you shouldn't be afraid of it. Other than Russia having nukes, their military sucks, is what we learned. That is not going to go over well with the military. And if the Ukrainians are right, I don't know if it's 5,000 Russian deaths. There clearly are a lot of Russian deaths. We can see this with just the convoys. We know it's not going good well for the Russians, right? So if there are thousands of Russian deaths, if that transcript is real of that poor Russian boy texting his mom and then getting killed, and the mom sees And the moms got these text messages saying, my son said they were tricked, that they were killing civilians, that people were hating them, and that people were, they didn't welcome that, and that things were so bad he wanted to kill himself, and now he's dead because of you. That's a hell of a story. It's a dictatorship, but Afghanistan, it took 10 years, but Afghanistan, the moms were one of the moms of the poor dead soldiers were one of the instrumental, groups in terms of ending the war and maybe even having a hand in ending communism, but really going against the government. So big deal there. But like I said, I'll look at it. It's 8:20 here, hour and 20 minutes. So this is usually where I start to cut it off. Thank you, by the way, because I appreciate. I'll look for another question or two and then we'll go. But I appreciate that you guys have been hanging out. This has been nice. We had even into the 3,000s, but we've had about 2.7 thousand now consistently throughout the rest of the thing. So I really appreciate that, guys. Follow me. Remember to follow me, please. And I've got a link there to my Substack. I've got a newsletter I write once or twice a week. I've been doing so many TikToks that I haven't written my newsletter this week, so I've got to write it. But it's a way for you to support. I'm trying to do all of this for a living. So I've just decided I'm going to spend the next few months just doing Ukraine, doing TikTok. I have this political newsletter I write. I've got a podcast, all sorts of things. You can find me on Twitter, @Aravosis, the same handle I use for TikTok, my last name, on Twitter, but also my Substack. If you wanted to support me financially, I would appreciate it because this is what I do for a living. Nobody pays me, other than clients or whatever I can find. But check it out in the link, Cyber Disobedience. You can check it out. You can still subscribe for free and get my updates. You get half of them. You get all of them if you pay. It's like $5 a month or something. But it's also just a way of supporting my work if you want. Because as I said, as long as I can keep going, and I am going to answer a couple more questions. As long as I can keep doing this, I am going to try to do one of these a day. I may have to cut back from an hour 20 because I think this may kill me. Because I'm also going to sit up for the next 4 hours watching the news about Ukraine right now after this till probably 1 o'clock. But I like doing this, and I like the feedback I'm getting from you guys. I like that you guys are into this, that you're finding it useful, and I'm finding it useful too because it's making me feel like I'm able to do something too, which I appreciate. That I can give back in some way to try to help folks there because my background is not military. It is foreign policy. It's politics, it's organizing, it's activism, it's all of that. So if I can somehow help in this way, that's great. So let me look really quick. Did you guys have any last questions or whatever just to throw in? Because I'm happy to do a quick little, the vacuum bomb. I'm not sure if the vacuum bomb wasn't the same thing as, the thermal barrack. Oh my God. I think we talked about that yesterday. I didn't even mention that today. I did talk about this yesterday. So the Russians are moving in thermal barrack weapons, which are basically, I think that's what you mean by the vacuum bomb. They're weapons that set the air on fire. And according to the generals on CNN, they are planning as a last resort, but they're planning, they're bringing them in. So it's not like it's something they're not going to use. They are planning to use it against military and civilian targets. And it is another indiscriminate weapon, meaning it's not like you pointed at one person. You send it out at large, in a large area, and it sets the oxygen in the air on fire, which does cause a vacuum. It literally, if you're too close to it, your body will vaporize and be gone. If you're further away, it will immediately suck the air out of your body so fast because the air around you has caught fire. So now the air out of your body is filling the vacuum that it destroys your organs all rupture. It's horrific, this weapon. And the Russians were caught moving it in yesterday and the day before. So this is why I really worry about where this is heading. I don't think we have a choice but to stand up to them as we have so far. We've got to worry about where this goes for us too. I understand why we don't want to get into a war with Russia, obviously. But, at some point, I just think, and it's been ratcheting up so much anyway, right? It's like Switzerland getting involved. That's crazy. Who thought? The Europeans being so unified. Germany willing to now get involved in the weapons, sales and increasing its defense budget, right? Switzerland getting involved. Europeans agreeing to the SWIFT banking blockade. Things that nobody thought we would all agree on. It's happening. The anger of the world and the response of the world is growing so fast that I think because Putin's doing so poorly, he is going to start going after civilians. It's going to be bloody and horrible. He's going to start using some of these weapons, even without the nukes, that the world is going to get to the next stage, which is they're going to have to get involved military. And maybe it will start with things such as letting the letting the Ukrainians use our bases with our planes, or even their planes, but our bases to fly in and out of, so the Russians don't dare bomb Poland, because if they bomb Poland, then we bomb Russia. It's going to be very dangerous, but the alternative is letting evil survive and spread in the world and watching innocent people die. And I will say this, I'm a realist too in politics. I never believe you get involved just because. You know, oh, what they're doing is evil, we should try to stop them. Well, you don't try to stop them if you literally know you can't stop them. Because then what are you doing? You're not helping anybody. You know, you're just making a futile move. I don't like that. But we kind of know we can stop Russia, but it could lead to a nuclear war. That is a valid concern, but I don't, and I'm going to close with this, I don't like it when people simply say, oh, anytime we challenge Russia, it could be a nuclear war, so I don't want to challenge Russia ever, and we're just going to let Russia kill anybody it wants, eat up any poor democracy like Ukraine that it wants, kill as many Ukrainian civilians as they want with horrible weapons. I don't agree with that. I think at some point, and maybe it's my mantra for life and why I've always been a civil rights activist and things like that too, at some point, you've got to live your, I'm going to say it this way, you've got to live your life like a Ukrainian. You've got to be willing to stand for stuff you believe in, and sometimes it means putting your life and your livelihood on the line to do it. Or frankly, like a lot of the Russians who are protesting nationwide, because they're putting their lives and their careers on the line too by protesting their government in a dictatorship. Sometimes you've got to have the backbone to do that, even though it could lead to bigger problems, if there's a chance you can win. And what the Ukrainians showed us was, you might even be able to win. So, all right, guys, please follow me. Thank you so much.